Okay, hi everyone. Welcome today to Xposure. My name is Jeff Farinich, and I'm the CISO at New American Funding. And I kind of titled my presentation about CISO on the front line, dealing with everything in the world throws at you. So, a little background about me. I started out in IT in 1995. I soon got into IT management in 97 in a leadership role. Got my MBA several years back, as well as multiple certifications in security. And I worked at companies going back from NGS Group, part of News Corporation for many years, Cisco Systems, Schools First Federal Credit Union, and also New American Funding. So I was recruited by New American Funding back in October 2019, basically to transform IT and create security. New American Funding is the largest family-owned lender in the U.S., currently ranked 13 in volume. And as I joined, I realized I was pretty much starting from scratch, building a team. And I followed the standard 90-day plan. So the goal was to really cultivate relationships at all levels of the organization, gain a situational awareness across the enterprise, and most importantly, really establish a security culture. And in 2020, it was really a crazy year. So I knew I was going into it building a program from scratch, and that included building IT out. But it was really busy as far as reviewing controls, and of course, focusing on people, process, and technology, trying to establish the budget funding for an organization that traditionally didn't spend a lot in security, and try to work towards the frameworks. But soon into the year, this thing COVID kind of came around the corner. Luckily, I saw it coming with a team. We prepared early in 2021, in Q1. And as part of the preparation, we made sure that we got what we needed for hardware and software early on. We bought thousands of laptops. We added capacity across the network, especially on VPN. And really overnight, we sent a company that was usually in the office 99%. That was a workforce based in the office home, of course, for a few days. Continuing through the year, 2020 was a record for the industry. It was a complete mortgage boom. We hired over 2,700 employees. The loan volume ended up growing about 38% to 29 billion. So it was a very busy year. And during that time, trying to improve controls along the way. As we all know, 2021 was a crazy December, starting with FireEye being breached, followed by SolarWinds, and of course, numerous tech companies and government agencies, the likes we've never seen before. But going to 2021, what was going to be for us? It sounded like the sky was falling. You look at the news, you talk to your peers, everyone's freaking out. But, for myself and my team, not really. We kept on the same roadmap we had planned. One thing I've been watching closely over the past several months is, what's happening with all these breaches? How are they happening? So it's a firm I've been talking to and looking at the research. They're called Cyber Rescue Alliance, and they analyzed over 100 breaches in the last 6 months. And one thing they've all identified is each of these companies had a weaker posture than their peers. So the one on the top right is CycogNet. They're a company that has records of various databases, and essentially they had a database exposed to the public and exposed 5 billion records. And as you could see, their peer ranking dropped considerably starting around February 1st. Next one, Electronic Arts, they had an API that was breached. Essentially, a hacker purchased a cookie for $10 that gave access to Slack. At that point, they impersonated an IT employee, and then they got access to a large database that's currently being sold for over $28 million on the dark web. And the last one here, which I think many have heard of and really impacted the US, was Colonial Pipeline. They had a VPN account that was on the dark web. It was a Stealth account, no MFA, and they also got compromised. So I watch very closely what's happening and try to understand. I don't want to be in this position, so for me, peer posture is very important to maintain. The risk is everywhere. my goal is to make sure the controls are too. I mean, look at email. Email security is critical, being a major vector for risk coming in, especially phishing and ransomware. You know, the network today is kind of blurred. There is no perimeter. You still have your firewalls at your offices and data centers, but you know, the approach really now is SASE, adopting that CASB approach, the SD-WAN. Infrastructure services are absolutely critical. We're all going to the cloud today, and how do you make sure our cloud's secure? There's a concept called cloud security posture management, a newer concept called cloud entitlement management. You move over to SaaS, you know, Office 365 out of the box is pretty insecure. That's got to be hard and locked down and monitored. Our third parties are probably the biggest challenges, understanding their risks. Our application risks are everywhere. Identities are really the biggest risk as well. Not only your users, but also your vendors, your contractors, and even your devices. And last are our endpoints. So all those I'm looking at on a constant basis on what our controls are and how to improve them. For myself, the frameworks I've followed are the ones that were required for regulation. Starting with the first one being CIS controls, which recently last month went from 20 to 18 controls. And of the 18 major controls, that means there's about 72 subcontrols. And the CIS controls are required for the California Consumer Privacy Act. In addition, we also like to adhere to what's required to operate in the state of New York, and that's part of the New York Department of Financial Services, and that's called Regulation 23 NYCR 500. So beyond those frameworks, we also follow MITRE attack framework, and you know, the SIMs now are trying to incorporate more capabilities moving towards XDR. And what's key for me here is the C-suite does not understand these technical frameworks, but they focus on what do we have to do by regulation. So how do I talk to the C-suite? I mean, the goal here is to earn a seat at the table. I am a member of the executive team, so I do get to talk to my peers, including the CEO, the founder, and the CEO, as well as other SVPs. I give updates to the stakeholders on a regular basis, at least monthly for the key stakeholders, and at least quarterly for the other stakeholders. The goal here is to become a business partner with your C-suite. As part of that, I communicate regularly. I educate on industry benchmarks and incidents. I inform on our strengths and weaknesses. I also compare to our peers what they're doing differently, better or for worse. I try to relate to the business objectives, and I report on metrics. Ransomware is in the news every day. In fact, right now, about 1,000 organizations a week are being impacted. But to me, this is pretty much entirely preventable. It's really about your controls. And as recently too, the US government is getting much more involved. The DOJ just last week is elevating ransomware probes to the same level as terrorism. But what controls are really missing that are needed? You know, it's really about having very strong endpoint controls. Really key, pick the right vendors and lock down that protection to the highest settings. Security is a major vector, email security. So I use a security email gateway at the perimeter, but I also scan email with an Office 365 with a second vendor. So having a dual vendor strategy to make sure that catches all those threats, including business email compromise. Internet security is critical. New American Funding, most of our users are home-based still, but they don't need a VPN. All the resources they need are on the internet. So I've adopted more of a SASE model using CASB. That allows me to have complete software web gateway security, complete application visibility down to the API layer. But more importantly, I get to see which data is crossing over the internet, and my DLP is able to block that where needed. Additionally, on all endpoints, USB security is critical. USB is also a major threat, so those are locked down. Vulnerability management. This is something that never ends. You can never keep up with all the patching required for vulnerabilities, but it's a constant process. System hardening is critical. You know, out of the box, most of our machines that are Windows-based come pretty insecure, so it's very important to lock down the systems, hardening, and make sure all the needed protocols are enabled. Micro-segmentation is critical for servers and also endpoints, especially at home now. We can't trust the home network of all of our users. Let's not forget user training. Users are the biggest source of getting breached, so let's make sure they know how to respond to threats and ask that question, is this file a risk or not, before opening. A key to our program is really continuous validation. We're constantly testing our controls for efficacy to making sure that they're working, and we're making improvements. And the last is making sure there's incident response capabilities and playbooks in place. So the internal attack surface is watched very closely. It's very important to know what are your assets that are exposed and how often they change. So these are graphs that I actually have today for my systems. I watch how many there are and what are the changes, and more importantly, what's the grades. Definitely want to make sure there's no Fs, and the Ds and Cs focus to get those cleaned up as well. And the posture is critical. I mentioned before, how do you rank to your peers? I watch that very closely. New American Funding is a smaller company compared to our peers who are larger and public, but we try to maintain a very strong posture whenever possible. So why am I here today? Xposure, because I am a very happy customer with Pentera. We've been using it about 6 months now. We do continuous security validation. And in the past, there's always a risk of pen testing once or twice a year. But with Pentera, I do scan regularly, my team does, and we find out what the risks are and remediate. For those of you that have cyber insurance, you probably noticed that the industry has really changed over the past few years. Premiums are skyrocketing as well as losses. So what are these insurers doing to remain competitive and, more importantly, stay in business? Well, what I've seen is that insurers are now getting involved with adopting continuous risk validation. There's an insurer I currently use, and they recognized at RSA this past year, but they adopted a model where, besides doing the analysis of the risk of the policyholder upon signing through a questionnaire, they're also doing continuous validation through control integration. So I'm sending them feeds from my controls, such as vulnerability management, endpoint, and others, so they know throughout any point in time how effective my controls are. And this allows the insurers and the policyholders to get a lower rate overall, because rates are increasing exponentially. Another area we've been focused on really importantly is identities. Identities are both users and users, including our customers. So we all know the threat of account takeovers. Credentials are not secure. Even with MFA, they're compromised very easily. Password changes are also very disruptive. You got 5,000 users at home, changing passwords on a 90-day cycle does cause a lot of impact to not only the help desk team, but also users. So to me right now, passwordless is no longer the future. It is here, it's usable. So we're adopting it on a wide scale across both our desktop logins as well as applications. And to really highlight how important passwordless is these days, even this week, Transmit Security raised the largest ever Series A funding at $543 million. So it's really taken a hold. Data privacy. It's really important to know where's your data and how is it secured. You want to have complete visibility of the data across the enterprise. So we scan all data sources, both on-premise and cloud, all data types are structured and unstructured. We try to classify based on sensitive categories, review the access users have, we encrypt where appropriate, and we're working now hard on data retention policies as well as data purge. It's really key here is assigning financial risk to your data. When you really talk to your stakeholders, what's the value of this data if it's breached? That helps to allow for budget funding for those categories. Thank you for your time today. And if there's any questions, feel free to place in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Have a very nice day.